Hello, everyone. So today we're here to kind of share about life after Talend and Informatica, and basically, and how we can achieve 80% lower costs and 30% faster, or 30 times faster insights. So the agenda for today, we're going to go through the breakdown of why do we want to migrate to away from these Talend Informatica and the legacy stack. And a little bit about the alternate vision. So basically how DBT is part of that solution, and share a little bit about some real world cases of why migrations are hard, right? So basically some challenges of acting and just the general case studies. And finally, we'll share a little bit more about how do we achieve that vision. So I'm Michael. I'm from Infinite Lambda. We are a data consultancy and academy, and we have been working in we're in EMEA and APAC, and as we're soon to launch our new teams in the US as well. And we've been helping sort of enterprise clients migrate away from legacy systems like Talend and Informatica. And Nina?
Morning, everyone. My name's Nina. I'm a partner solutions architect at DBT Labs. Prior to that, I was in data consulting too, and spent a lot of time helping our customers with data platform migrations of various kinds. So thanks for having me on.
Great. So we will start with a little bit of quiz, just as a fun little sort of quiz for everyone. Truth or fiction, over 50% of organizations globally do not plan to deploy AI in 2025. I'll just give everybody a couple of seconds here. Do we see how many people vote? Cool. Well, reality is fiction. Over 50% of organizations globally do not plan to deploy AI in 2025. Truth or fiction, data sovereignty is not an issue on the cloud. And I think we're at 70-30 fiction truth. Well, I think more people got it. But yeah, data sovereignty is definitely an issue in the cloud. So just to give an example for, obviously for all our folks in Europe, GDPR and all of those things. But also, in APAC, we deal with things like PDPA, and in Singapore, we have data sovereignty laws in Indonesia and things like that as well. And generally, the way that something is stored or processed is going to be impacted by your cloud, and not just, what your cloud or AWS region is. There could be other, even more specific about what type of data can be exported. Some can leave your zone but can't be processed, things like that. Right. Cost savings are guaranteed on the cloud. All right. I think most people got it this time as well. Fiction, 75%, 9-3 fiction to truth. You are correct. Just saying, hey, we're going to move to the cloud obviously does not guarantee your cost savings. Actually, what we've seen a lot is that companies tend to overshoot their cloud budget and pay for capacity that they're not using up front, because you say, hey, you get the bulk buy discount. but ultimately managing the cost of cloud computing is an ongoing challenge. You got to have a lot of optimization strategy, constant kind of FinOps and things like that for your setup, right? Next one, cloud warehouses are more expensive to run. Let's see where we're gonna. Dun, dun, dun. Okay, we're again at 9-3 fiction, and that is correct. On-premise solutions require a lot of hardware maintenance, IT staff, right? So that should really be taken into account in your TCO. And these tend not to be considered especially when you're looking at comparing like a new cloud initiative with a existing on-premise system, right? And so for instance, Snowflake has, a pay what you're using pricing. So you eliminate a lot of the costs for expensive upfront CapEx on infrastructure, and you can scale up and down as needed. And really where you save a lot of money is when you part ways with the redundant infra and optimizing your cost of compute based on your actual usage. Spicy one. So 90% of on-premise data is never even used for analytics. I think actually this one is, well, most people guess this one. Again, 11-2 truth to fiction, and that is true. 90% of on-premise data is never used for analytics because most of the enterprise data remains dark data, basically, right? So a lot of data is collected and stored, but never ever analyzed or queried. And this is often what we see because on-premise data make querying and accessing data difficult. Data is not properly even cataloged, so you just have these pipelines that run for years and years and years, just throwing data into the lake or the archive, and they just never see the light of day, unfortunately. So, cloud migration removes skills shortage. Oh, interesting. I think this one's a little bit more evenly spread. I think it's a 7-5, 8-5 fiction to truth. Well, in reality, what we see at least is a fiction, because actually 61% of organizations report worse skills shortage post-migration. One, because you lose your familiarity with your legacy system, and you actually lose a lot of productivity post immediately after your transition. And well, only 25% of enterprise data is actually moving to the cloud today. Just look at that poll. It'd be great if I can get Jeopardy music to play right now, but Okay, all right. So, yeah, I think most people guess this one as well. Well, only 25% of enterprise data is actually moving to the cloud today. That is true because despite the cloud boom, the majority, 75% of enterprise data is still on-prem. And this is largely because what we've seen is due to technical debt and compliance fears and a lack of clear migration strategy. So to kind of recap, it paints a little bit of a bleak picture, right? Where 55% of companies plan to deploy new AI, but on the other hand, the majority of on-premise data is never used. You have a lot of baggage. Cloud data warehouse are cheaper to run, but you're going to have a problem trying to migrate because you're going to have a growing skill gap when you try. And the majority of enterprises are scared to move their data. Well, there is more. We see from survey that we are expected for the AI spend on AI is expected to grow at 37% a year to balloon to more than 1 trillion by 2030. And this is bigger than the dot-com boom spend, and that it will amount to more than $100 billion a year on spend on cloud platforms like AWS and Azure. And the fact is that most companies are not optimizing their spend quite that well. Let's say companies like Netflix actually are able to save like $1 billion a year with an ML recommender. And and even just a lot of great examples and applications are being deployed. However, the existing legacy setups are becoming a problem, right? So I don't know, presumably a lot of the people on the call today have had to deal with systems like Talend or Informatica estates, right? So you will notice all of these symptoms listed here. Right. So what was kind of a no-brainer solution a few years ago is now becoming a pain in the rear end. Skyrocketing compute costs, licensing fees, and for large enterprises, these could go into the millions. And for all of that licensing fee, right, and that's just basically a fixed cost. You still have to deal with complex data integrations. You're going to have to deal with slow performance in the pipelines. Generally, what we see with these tools, it lacks scalability, not just in terms of sort of compute scalability, but also how that applies to your teams, right? Your kind of complexity and your governance scalability. And that really ends up impacting your data quality and your governance. And as a result, it becomes really difficult to apply new advanced AI and analytics capabilities, right? And fundamentally, this is just because the architecture of these tools are from the previous decade, right? So they try to do all of the ETL kind of processes, and unfortunately, they do it somewhat poorly. So we recommend that this breakup is for the best, right? And it is necessary, really, for you as data practitioners to sleep better at night, to know that you have better governance and data quality tools. It is necessary for you as managers to give the business the much needed sort of trustworthy data products, the self-service and analytics initiatives that you've been promising, the fancy Gen AI features your data stakeholders are asking for, right? And the way that we see to achieve that is with the recognizable holy trinity of the modern data stack, Fivetran, Snowflake, and dbt, right? And we think that this trio ticks all of the boxes for a large enterprise looking for an escape from the legacy setup, right? This is what we see is that this will net you at least 50% lower total cost of ownership, 80% lower licensing fees, 24 times better performance, and generally being cloud native tools, you really get this effortless scalability of your compute and just the size of data, but also in terms of your workflow, which really is the simplicity of the tools and which really lead to the meaningful improvement of your data quality, right? And to really achieve that, we really think that DBT is the tool to go to help sort of, or to give you that simplicity, right? And the way to do that is through better data ops and better workflow. And Nina is here to share a little bit more about that.
Cool. Thanks, Michael. So we just heard a bit about why you might migrate from legacy, but how do we think about the future? Like, what framework we even use to think about what that looks like? If you're here, you've likely already spent some time thinking about what are desirable qualities for how you do data as an organization, and what are the desirable qualities for the technologies that are going to support that. At DBT, we spend a lot of time thinking about this. It's kind of our reason for existence in some ways, to be opinionated on this subject and to help our customers achieve a mature and well-functioning approach to data that is going to serve them. So the analytics and development lifecycle, or ADLC, is the framework that we've developed for thinking about that target state. It contains these 8 phases in this kind of infinite loop that you see on the screen. And I also find it's a good framework for, first of all, articulating the pains and the challenges with an existing state of affairs, especially to your internal stakeholders, right? So that's where we start. The ADLC it's really a roadmap around data ops that is supposed to bring the best ideas of software engineering, right? We've borrowed this concept from the software development lifecycle. So to bring those ideas into the entire data and analytics workflow. It's also a guide for what tooling you might need to be able to achieve all those elements in harmony, to achieve them efficiently and to achieve them consistently over time. Because as we all know, the data work never stops, right? We iterate, we continue, we build. So how do we facilitate the smooth running of a data organization, and one that serves everybody? Note that nowhere on this slide does it say DBT. And that's because the ADLC is much bigger than DBT. It's bigger than any individual product, than this webinar, right? It's meant to be a framework that's all encompassing for thinking about how we do data. And as fun as it would be to do a webinar about the ADLC, and in fact we have done, I cannot spend all my time on that, but if you are curious and if this has sparked ideas about how you might apply it to your organization, you can find a white paper about the ADLC on our website. I think if you scan this QR code, you should be able to get it that way, or to use the hyperlink below as well. You'll also find some other helpful resources on there around how to build business cases for migrations, and specifically kind of total cost of ownership analysis. So a little primer on the ADLC, because I think it's a nice way of framing the conversation, like why would we do this and what is it we're looking to achieve? Now, you might already be considering DBT Cloud if you're here. You might still be developing that target architecture, but let's talk a little bit about how DBT Cloud delivers on the promises of the ADLC, right? We really think about 3 themes or value drivers, you might say. The first one is around how do we build trust in data and data teams when they're going through that continuous cycle of the ADLC. DBT Cloud allows you to reduce data downtime and optimize data pipelines whilst embedding trust signals. It comes with an inbuilt data testing framework, which can then be leveraged across the ADLC. So both development and surfacing trust signals to stakeholders and within the CI process as well. And what that allows you to do is to standardize data governance and avoid the impact of bad data ever reaching production. So with our customers, we do see a 30 to 80% reduction in data quality issues after they implement dbt Cloud. So trust is kind of the first pillar that we look at. Secondly, how do you ship data products faster? You might be migrating from one platform to another. It might be an entirely new kind of use case. Michael talked about AI. Like, how do we get from the point of the idea to development, testing, and getting into production? So dbt Cloud is designed to facilitate smoothing that process and allowing all the different folks that need to be involved to contribute effectively. That, of course, then allows faster time to insight. So through the interface of dbt Cloud, which I'll share a bit more about in a minute, it really allows different personas with different skill sets to contribute and to be reactive, because we don't always know exactly what's coming down the pipe. Through that, we also improve data literacy and allow self-service. So we talk about shifting left at dbt. How can you help folks shift left from self-serving in dashboards to being able to kind of deliver the data products that they need for themselves, rather than relying on other teams to deliver that for them. So we see a 30 to 50% improvement in data velocity, as in delivering data products faster, and also in data team productivity. The third theme really is optimizing costs. So we did some quiz questions at the beginning around, is it more expensive? Is it cheaper to move to the cloud? And the answers were really kind of, often it depends. And like, it's a lot down to how you apply a well-architected framework. dbt also facilitates this, right? When you implement dbt Cloud, it gives you a level of observability and inbuilt best practices around using that compute and using those resources of the underlying data platform optimally. So that shows up in a number of different ways, partly observability, as I mentioned, but also making data assets really easy to reuse, so that folks don't just go off and rebuild their own things without being aware that, hey, maybe somebody's already built this. So we tend to see at least a 10 to 20% reduction in data platform costs for that reason. But right, we couldn't deliver on any of those promises around the ADLC without being truly multi-platform, right? You might be migrating to one or more of these. It might be that you're a large enterprise, and actually the reality is that some teams are using one and some teams are using another at the current point in time. So dbt Cloud really provides this consistent developer framework where folks can have this familiar interface, a governed but efficient way of working, and that's going to look the same for them, whatever the underlying compute platform is that they're using. Nor could we achieve the promises of the ADLC without allowing different personas with different skill sets to participate in building data products and self-serving those products. So we try to be quite thoughtful about how they do, and we talk about meeting users where they are. So for those more technical users, they may be most comfortable developing in the command line. We offer the dbt Cloud CLI, so folks can kind of develop their transformations code in a CLI-based environment. There's also the dbt Cloud IDE, which is probably the most commonly used, and for folks who are kind of comfortable with SQL, maybe some Python, maybe not, understand a little bit around version control, but not having to be super comfortable with the intricacies of Git, you have the dbt Cloud IDE. Would encourage you to go and create a free trial if you have not done so far. And then very excited that we'll now have this third element, or this third way of interacting with dbt come end of May, which is the visual editing experience. And with this, it will really give kind of business users and folks who are more comfortable developing in a visual way the ability to contribute back to dbt projects. Now, all of that work will still resolve to code. It will still go through the same CI/CD processes. It's just that we're providing a visual way of interacting and building. So we try and meet users where they are, no matter what the existing skill set. So we thought a little bit about target state as well. How do you then benchmark what your current state is and actually go ahead and set more specific and measurable desired outcomes? We've done a little worked example here on the slide, but if you are interested in more detail on building a business case, you can go to the dbt website and find a full guide on business cases. But let's say we identify a problem that requested changes to something like a customer account view would take 3 weeks to fulfill because it's going through a data engineering team. We might then identify that what we want is to enable analysts to be able to own transformation workflows. And actually what would be desirable based on the business SLAs is to be able to deliver the data in 1 week instead of 3. So we start to get a bit more specific about a needs analysis, and that can then help you to both define the target state and then to create a business case around the technology procurement as well, and the migration process itself. Similar examples below, so less to do with delivering shipping data products, more to do with the actual performance of the platform. The second example is around dashboard loading time. How do you kind of dig into what the issues are with the current architecture, and how do you design a new system that is going to achieve a sub 10-second load time, something like that, right? And then thirdly, maybe you've got disparities across on-prem and cloud data, right? If you're kind of mid-migration there, it actually reduces trust in the data. So how do you then create both a process and a technological landscape that is going to allow you to really standardize and therefore build trust again across the business and the data products that you are producing. So just a couple of more specific examples of where you might go when thinking about building up that target state and desired outcomes. I will hand back over to Michael now to talk a bit about the migration process itself.
Right. Thanks, Nina. Well, hopefully we've convinced you a little bit on the why you should move and what that target state might look like. And however, the unfortunate reality here is that what we see, only about 1 in 7 cloud migration succeeds. And what succeeds meaning kind of really hitting that desired state that Nina was talking about, right? And we're going to share a little bit about a few cases that we have worked on and some of their challenges, just as a reference to you guys to really help contextualize that, right? So the difficulty of the migration itself and why only 1 in 7 cloud migration succeeds. So firstly, this is an example of a fintech innovator. So a smaller company, early, very innovative, early FX remittance fintech in Europe. But a high sort of volume of transaction. Now, their initial motivation to migrate is pretty straightforward and easy to understand, right? They have an existing on-prem system that was difficult to scale up. Their reporting infra and was needed to be rationalized after a series of M&A. And their system was built by external contractors and teams wanted to internalize, right? So really you can see that a lot of it is just all about cost optimization, and they wanted to move away from their SQL Server and SSIS setup. So they were attempting to do this themselves initially. And what they quickly found was that having a small data team, a lean data team, they were having a lot of issues doing manual refactoring alongside their ongoing workload, right? Basically, they couldn't tell their business stakeholders, hey, we got to drop everything and work this problem for the next 6 months, and we can't do anything else, right? But at the same time, they had the pressure to realize this cost, right? And on the other hand, they had also the initial original system, running on SQL Server, was designed with a lot of patterns that did not fit this new cloud system. So if they had done a pure lift and shift where they literally copy and pasted their logic into I think they were going to to the cloud, they would not gain all the performance gains that they should have for their cost. Right. And finally, they had a lot of technical challenges maintaining consistency for their historical data. And this could be things like when you move to a different set of timestamps, or when you're moving sort of data that used to be batch consumed, how are they going to make that pipeline that's moving to, let's say, every 2 hours, right? And to make that match and make that sort of data outcomes comparable to their historical data without literally just copying all of the historical data. And then, and this would be up to the terabytes, going for things like FX rates and exchange and transactions, and trying to rewrite it in process, in transit, right? So there were a lot of unknowns when they started out the process, and they would basically quickly sort of, I think about after a month or so, they ran into these problems. Moving to a bigger company. So Massive was just one of our clients, or very kindly allowed us to share their challenges here. So for people who are not familiar with the company, they're a large French insurance company with a wider range of products. And as an aside, they are also very committed to social responsibility and customer-centric services and values that we align with. So when they started out their process, I think they were also looking to do that. Internally, their initial challenges were really around the cost of compute and licensing, and that their legacy system just ran very slowly, right? So what really kind of drove them to look into the migration was that they had a license renewal, and that was kind of a hard deadline. And it was like, hey, look, the next time we renew, it's going to be 20% more. They were being pushed to move to, I think, the one of the cloud variants of Informatica, and the cost would have gone up a lot more with a more lock-in, right? And unfortunately, when they started the process, they ran into these problems that they were kind of not expecting. So firstly, the process itself is risky, right? From not just because of company-wise cost and all of that. It's also just risky from an individual data team perspective, right? It is something you have to take responsibility for and stick your neck out. The team wanted to move to the modern data stack, but could not map out the process exactly from an Informatica ETL to a DBT ELT setup. And there were a lot of anti-patterns that were sort of nested deep in that ETL code that they weren't able to identify initially. So they'll get to a point and say, hey, how do we address this pattern when we move to this new setup? And they had no answer for it. They had attempted to use another vendor for automated conversion, but then produced a lot of spaghetti code that they really couldn't maintain, right? So then they were faced with all of these problems. Finally, a very, very large company, a multinational pharma and biotech company. So their initial motivation to move beyond the sort of rising costs and vendors pushing for locked-in solution, as we were saying, they had also multiple siloed data architectures, right? They had basically, for a company of that size, 100+, 1,000+ employees. They had basically all of the technology you can think of, right? They had Talend, they had Informatica, they had, also some cloud systems here and there, but the problem was everything was siloed within their own data architecture, and they had no way of sort of having an overall lineage view. And they basically brought on some new executives to rationalize and reduce costs of the data team globally, right? And unfortunately, as they were sort of the executives starting to plan out their change management process, they realized they didn't have a way to continue to monitor the new code base, right? So how do you ensure that you don't end up in the same place 3 years down the road? How can I make sure that, we know that they have all these bad engineering practices. How do we get to a place where we have good engineering practices? They had no centralized understanding of lineages, sources, and their targets, which basically meant that they couldn't plan out which team needed to go first without very expensively running workshops and really trying to sort out these spaghetti code by hand. And similarly, from the previous case, automated migration attempts failed, generally due to the output quality and project management problems. And they were similarly faced with a costly license renewal, which were in the millions, right? And essentially, any overruns past the deadline date, they will have to renew, and that would cost millions, next to the sort of newly spun up cloud stack. So in review, is it the case of no pain, no gain, right? So the two kind of approaches that we were discussing here, there's a manual migration and there's an automated migration, right? And in the manual case, it could be very error prone and very costly, right? And you have very little control over the process itself. So you can have a very long time to actually see value while your business stakeholders are waiting for an output. And sometimes, because due to the lack of institutional knowledge and practices, you end up in the same place of a mess, right? So you didn't really know where, you didn't really have the institutional knowledge to keep the new code base in control. And similarly, with an automated tool, you may have a very short time to value. You can get the completion, you can get to the migration complete stage within months, but you end up with something that maybe isn't optimized for cloud, right? So something that ends up, that's much more expensive to run in terms of compute, instead of something that is quite running like in a wild machine. You also have other problems of high cost to maintain, and you're slowing down your speed of iteration just because of the complexity of the code that nobody really understands because it was written by a machine. We're here to tell you there is another way. And that is with Infinite Lambda's Flowline product. And what we do is essentially a form of assisted code migration. So we use automations to keep things like cost and timelines in check, and to assess your code base. But we inject that with our sort of DBT expertise to ensure that best practices are followed. You have the guardrails on your system to make sure that even as you onboard your own teams, the best practices can be followed, and you have ways to govern that. We have infrastructure as code provisioning for all components, including Snowflake, Fivetran, DBT, so that you can have easy ways to deploy new use cases, even that we are not sort of work on for you, and generally just follow best practices to realize the gains that you're going to get. And what you see here, still we can sort of, because of the automated component of this, we're able to still keep that timeline in check so that it is within months that you will see your sort of time to value. And additionally, we try to break down these projects into components and sort of more manageable pieces so that it is sort of, you have a continuous process of deployment and you continually see sort of value realized in different units in your business. And beyond just the code and the engineering of it, we see this as an end-to-end offering. And what that means is we will also do the sort of planning, the project management, change management, and handover and knowledge transfer towards the end, right? So just to recap, the way that we kind of work on this is we take your legacy data estate, we pass it through sort of our 9-stage process, which really is just an assessment, and that basically gives us the confidence to offer our sort of services as a fixed price project, so that it keeps your cost and timeline in check, and that our interests and incentives are aligned. And then we migrate that code, we migrate the data. We have a well-oiled sort of project delivery format to ensure that the data quality and the outcome matches the expectation, and you can have a seamless switchover to your new, better, improved, refactored data stack. And finally, we also have ways to offer professional services for optimization, innovation, or just general support. We go down the line, right? And yeah, and basically, these are the ways that we look at sort of the different key migration challenges that we were talking about, right? You have your to address the issue with refactoring. We have our high automated assessment and analysis and planning, so that we know, so that we have that confidence to offer the fixed cost package. We have a rigorous data validation and testing protocol to address any concerns around data integrity and quality. We use our sort of delivery process, continuous delivery process, to ensure that there are no downtime and disruption to your business stakeholders, even during the migration. And finally, our project management team will take care of the change management, and we also have an academy that will run your knowledge transfer and training programs. And and basically, if you guys are, or if anyone is sort of curious about this process, or if you're looking to understand sort of where you stand in terms of your migration process or planning, we have a readiness assessment that is basically will help sort of spot any potential risk factors to your migration, similar to kind of what we were talking about before with the unknown unknowns. We're here to help you make that at least known unknowns with our readiness assessment. You can get the link from that QR code there, or we will also share to you via email after this event. With that, we are going to go into Q&A. I see we have a few questions already. Right, let's start with this one. What's the most common mistakes you've seen during a migration? Well, I can share from my end, and then Nina, you can also chip in as well. But I think the main problems, I think from a technical side, is doing too much of a pure lift and shift, where you literally, especially when you're moving from something like SQL Server to DBT, there is or to Snowflake, right? There is a desire to literally copy and paste your code into the new setup, right? You say, hey, here's some SQL. Oh, that runs SQL. We'll just copy and paste it over. That can be really, really bad. So some of the most common issues we've seen with that is like things like sequential IDs, right? You have a very common pattern in MySQL or SQL Server. You have a column called ID, and it goes 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. But then when you move to a parallel compute system like Snowflake or even BigQuery, Databricks, whatever, these kind of sequential IDs are really, really slow to generate, right? So just that one column could just ruin your entire sort of projected performance gains. Yeah. Nina?
Yeah. Since you talked about the technical side of things, I'll comment on the business side a bit. I think mistakes I see, sometimes failure to set expectations across the business, the wider business, right, about what we're going to get from this. Oftentimes, the platform team can focus heads down, like it can be challenging, right? So a lot of thought goes into that rather than, like how do we do the PR for this almost? And then along with that, failure to show early wins. Like people want to get excited about what they're going to get, right? And sometimes that's down to structuring the project. Can we do almost like a proof of concept, or like one slice of functionality, one use case that really gets people to rally around the project, and it makes delivering the rest of it easier. That's what I'd say.
That's a great one. And maybe to just add to that, once you have that one use case people rally around, the expectation is that you can continue to deliver the same use case across different businesses or over time, right? And especially when we talk about migration, the thing is to having a sort of keeping the train sort of on track, right, is sort of the most difficult part of the process. And that kind of goes back to the unknown unknowns. You might have budgeted, a month for every business unit. And let's say when you get to a particular business unit, that totally derails your train. And that could be kind of really disastrous, both for just, from what we're talking about in terms of absolute costs and things like that, but also just losing a lot of your stakeholder trust, right? Then the next train, passenger might be like, actually, no, I'm okay. I don't want to do this anymore. I'll stick with my Oracle and SAP. And that could be really bad. Cool. That is done. More questions. Do this one now. Can we avoid reduced downtime and how? So I think that's kind of from a technical standpoint, for sure. Like you can, if you're talking about downtime from a sort of end user perspective, there are ways to sort of set up your deployment, so to speak, again, from a technical perspective to you have your Power BI dashboards or whatever you're using for your BI, and sort of having the right switchover so that, hey, the next day it all goes to the new data source, right? And that's obviously the hope, the dream. And from our perspective, at least, there's two kind of major components to that. One is having the right development infrastructure, putting that on the best practice so that everything can be deployed properly, everything can be tested properly in transit. But also specifically for migrations, it's making sure your historical data matches. Because that's the thing that most people are familiar with. Really realistically speaking, do I know what the data that I'm getting today, the new data point is supposed to look like? Maybe not, but I know what it was yesterday. And if I, refresh my dashboard and it comes out to that, even though the dashboard is up and it's running, it's querying the new data source, somehow my data from yesterday changed. And that's kind of one of those things that loses your stakeholder trust, right? So from Infinite Lambda, we have this kind of a automated data testing framework, what we essentially use to compare data from your historical source to your new migrated source at a cell by cell level to make sure that everything matches. We give you a report for that so that you kind of have that confidence before you do that switchover. Right. And then from sort of an ongoing data perspective, we use a lot of dbt to do our data quality testing. And that goes back to kind of what Nina was saying before about the ADLC, right? Which is really that iterative process of checking your data before you deploy it, continuously making these improvements along the way. And and get this kind of infinite loop of improvements. And then we have one more question I see.
Want me to take this one?
Oh, yeah. Did you want to take? Yeah, go ahead.
We can both, actually. I was just reading this question around, are there learning paths for traditional / legacy skilled resources, I guess, people, right, to go from A, or previous state, to DBT, and how does that compare, DBT versus others? I think for me, like, the thing to know here is DBT and DBT Cloud specifically is designed to smooth that and make their barrier to entry low while still retaining governance. So folks who know some SQL can pick this up pretty quick. We tend to, I think about abstracting away technical detail that is not relevant to give folks more leverage. I think that's what DBT does. So things like version control, although that might be a concept that, data analysts might not have spent a lot of time thinking about before. The way that dbt integrates that within the product is a way that allows folks to focus on, I suppose, the concepts rather than learning, 15 different Git commands that they ultimately don't need to. So I think answer one is how the product is designed. Two would be the on-demand learning paths and the community. So that's what I would say from a dbt perspective. I don't know, Michael, if you wanted to share from your experience as well.
Yeah, and full disclosure, I'm also a community sort of like a organizer for dbt. So I run some local meetups. I've attended a lot. So we get a lot of people who are interested and curious about learning it, right? And so what I think with dbt is really, really powerful is that the minimum threshold required to be productive is very, very low, right? So what Nina was saying, you just need to know SQL and a few maybe things that are dbt specific. You can write dbt models, right? And it abstracts away a lot of the difficulties of writing a data pipeline, right? So that's why you have people who are more data analyst focused going into sort of these data engineering roles or analytics engineering roles. The other thing to kind of combat that, or the flip side of that, is have a very high skill cap. And that's kind of typically things that we associate with more on the tooling and best practice side. So building the right organizational guardrails, let's say the right kind of tests that you put in for data quality testing and things like that. Make that kind of the ability, limits the people's ability to write bad code, so that you have a more, almost like a safe space to practice your skills in. So I think that's a really important bit to sort of learn, and sort of to have if you're doing a organizational level migration and training program, right? So you basically teach them the basic, and then hey, now you can go and be productive. But you give them these like essentially flashing lights where it's like, oh, you did this thing maybe not the best way. Here are some ways you can improve it. Like Nina said, like dbt Cloud has all these like IDE features. It has the kind of linter features where they will kind of tell you, hey, this is not best practice, or hey, we don't like this style. You should put commas in front and things like that. Yeah, that's kind of, and there's also a lot of really great resources from their Slack, which I encourage everyone to join, that you can kind of in a really active community on there to give you more learning resources. More questions. Oh yeah. Nina has shared pitching the migration to management. Yeah, Nina has shared a really great sort of dbt's own resources that she was mentioning before, which is the making the case for dbt Cloud and building that. But depending on the size of the company, we also see just if it's possible with your own teams, having a really simple POV, and it's really simple to spin up. Normally, especially if you have a sort of, if you're already on some kind of cloud database, and just having that little thing and say, hey, look, here's the same pipeline from A versus B. You will see the kind of difference, the kind of in the general improvement. Cool. I think that is all the questions. Yeah, well, and we have a couple minutes to spare, which is great. Everyone can get some coffee or something before your next meeting. Thank you, everyone, for the participation today, and we will be sharing all of the resources after this webinar, and hopefully we will talk soon again if you take our migration assessment. And yeah, thanks again.
Thanks, everyone.
Have a good day.